They took Gambit's title card out of the intro. Yeah, okay. I see how it is. You've been having a lot of fun with this for the last week, haven't you, Marvel? You cheeky little shits. You kill Gambit off in X-Men 97, and then you release a variant cover with him on it. He gets the big damn hero moment when he dies, but then a writer of one of the upcoming new X books shits on him on social media because isn't that f***ing hilarious? Then you take him out of the classic intro 1 week after you did this while fans are still really raw about it. Y'all are having a little too much fun with this. But you know what? You go ahead. You have your fun. Keep it up. Keep on toying with us. Because that's only gonna stoke this fire even more. Gambit fans have built up a hell of a tolerance for angst over the years, and we can take whatever you can dish out. So bring it on, assholes. That already put me in quite a mood, and I haven't even gotten to the episode yet. So monkeys in the editing dungeon, hit my intro, and let's do this! So, how's everybody doing after last week? I'm still a little bit shook, as they say, and the change to the intro certainly didn't help, but I was kind of expecting that to happen, so at least I was buckled up. Episode 6 was a cool-down installment after last week before things get crazy again. They finished off the Storm plot and developed some side stories. They did not get back to the events in Genosha, which I was almost relieved about. I felt like I needed a little bit of a breather before I stepped back into that emotional firestorm, at least until I've managed to stuff my still-beating heart back into the chest cavity they ripped it out of. So this was another weird episode where they divided the focus between two completely separate stories. Thankfully, they did a better job of it than episode 4 did, because this time the stories are linked thematically. They're about Storm and Xavier both having to look inside themselves and confront something really difficult in order to get to a better place, only for the Genosha attack to pop up at the end, flip that table over, and remind them of what's most important. In that sense, it works, but one of the stories does it better than the other. And what was so strange about it is that the story that was advertised as being the sole focus this week was essentially the B-plot. And I hate to say it, but this is why it was a bad idea to break up the Storm story the way they did. Because going back to it right after Remember It flipped over every damn table in the narrative makes this Storm story feel weirdly unimportant. Maybe that's not the right word, and it's not that important stuff doesn't happen here, but I think people are gonna feel really impatient with it right now. It comes off like something we just needed to get out of the way. Just real quick, repower Storm, get her back on the board, and then return to the stuff everyone's buzzing about, but not until the next episode. And I can't help but think that if they just recut a few things and rejiggered the episode order a little bit, this wouldn't have been an issue. So Life Death Part 2 was touted as being the conclusion of the Storm story where she gets her powers back, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this part because, frankly, there's really not that much to it. When we left off, Storm and Forge had just been attacked by some kind of psychic demon thing, the adversary. We really didn't know what it was, and we don't get much new information this week either. This week, it's about the adversary tormenting Storm, trying to get her to abandon Forge, who it's infected with some kind of venom that's slowly killing him, throwing all of Storm's worst fears in her face. Claustrophobia, of course, that's a big one. And also this little thing in the back of her mind where she kind of wanted to lose her powers to be free of the pressure of being a mutant, because what did that ever really get her? And the point of this is to suggest that the reason Storm's powers haven't come back yet is psychological rather than Forge's science machine just not working. She's got a mental block, basically. And that was interesting. I was wishing they would expand on that more because it had really only been alluded to in that one scene with Clone Jean in the premiere. I wanted more context, but we don't get it because then Forge runs in and drives off the adversary with magic because, oh, by the way, Forge can do magic. Never even hinted at before this scene, but it's a thing. So that comes out of nowhere. And then the rest of the story is about finding some Deus Ex Machina cactus that's gonna save Forge from the magic demon venom because cacti can do that somehow. There's a conversation where Storm elaborates that a part of her really wanted to be human because as hard as she tried, her mutant powers only seemed to inspire more hatred in humanity, and the thought of being rid of all that is tempting, and it's had her struggling with some identity issues. And this is fine and good as character work goes. I just wish we could have gotten more of it before now. Storm has to go into some really tight cave to find this cactus. The adversary catches up to her in there and makes it seem like the walls are closing in on her, really needling her claustrophobia, and just give in to me and I'll release you from all this. And she almost does. She almost does, but then realizes that she had to stop believing that lie she told herself, so Storm snaps out of the funk she's been in, psychs herself up, and bing bang boom, her powers come back. And this sequence is very cool. They let the tension build up just enough, and then the music swells, the animation is great, the effect is so huge you can see it from space, it's very uplifting, you're really rooting for Storm here. This one sequence is so well done, it almost kind of redeemed this afterthought of a plot. She even conjures herself up a new costume right out of the Claremont era comics, and also her hair grows back, because, you know, somehow controlling the weather does that. And then, somehow, the adversary is just gone. It disappears so quickly you might have missed it if you blinked. Hell, I missed it the first 2 times I watched this sequence. We never even find out what the hell it is or where it came from. It's just gone. I don't know. So Storm gets the Deus Ex Machina cactus, it completely heals Forge in a few seconds because makes it easy, and just like that they start talking about taking a tropical vacation together because apparently they're in love now even though they've realistically only known each other for like 4 or 5 days tops. But then they see the Genosha attack on the news, so it's back to horrifying reality. I wish I liked this plot more than I did, because in the quieter moments when they were discussing character stuff, that was really good. And a lot of the visuals when the adversary was putting Storm through the mental ringer were very dark and disturbing. I like that stuff. But then they just had to start rushing everything again. They omitted some really important information, such as what the is the adversary, and then they just find some magic MacGuffin that heals Forge instantly, so no need to worry about that, I guess. This whole thing was just wrapped up too fast and too easily, and that sucks, because the sequence where Storm gets her powers back is great. It just needed a better episode around it, and there was better stuff here, but that was reserved for the A-plot. And this was something I didn't expect to see until the end of the season at the earliest. We check in with the Shi'ar, and I start thinking, hey, is this building up to the return of Xavier? Are we gonna see him again this season? And then 10 seconds later, there he is, and the episode is all about him. So yeah, the slow burn isn't really a thing anymore, I guess. Xavier's recovered from his injuries, although the Shi'ar couldn't give him a new spine, unfortunately, so he's getting around with a sci-fi exosuit, but I'm jumping ahead here. It starts in the middle of this massive space battle between the Shi'ar Empire and the Kree. I don't know what it's about, they're warring over something, but again, they're giving us so many cool cameos, and I love it. Ronan the Accuser, who really got bitch slapped here, but it's still cool to see him. Deathbird, Gladiator, the Imperial Guard, Vulcan, the Third Summers brother. It's so much fun, you could make a drinking game out of this. So Deathbird is in the middle of smacking down the Kree like they owe her money, but her fun is interrupted by Lalandra making a big announcement that she is to be married to the very much alive Charles Xavier. So that's how they revealed that he didn't die after all. Kinda weird that they didn't save this for an episode-ending cliffhanger or something, but it's still really great to see Chuck again. And the new voice actor sounds so much like the original one, it's downright eerie. Now, on paper, this marriage seems like a good match, since Xavier did help save the Shi'ar from Decan and the Dark Phoenix, but turns out the Shi'ar Empire is full of xenophobic assholes, and nobody's really happy about this, Deathbird in particular. Behind closed doors, Xavier's happy with Lalandra, but he is really feeling the urge to go home and wants Lalandra to consider maybe ruling the Empire from his corner of the galaxy. And none of this is going over well with the rest of the Shi'ar. The war with the Kree has divided their people, or so they say, and the Empress marrying a lowly Terran is just kind of throwing gas on the fire. Deathbird confronts them about this publicly, calling them out for making a political alliance with this marriage that would be disadvantageous to the Empire, and that's the polite way of saying it. And I can kind of see where Deathbird's coming from here. She's definitely meant to be the villain in this situation, but she does make a good point. The Shi'ar are at war, and political alliances could make or break them right now, so tying them to a backwater planet on the wrong side of the galaxy galaxy might not be the practical thing to do. She's being an asshole about it, yeah, but that doesn't mean there's no truth here. So as a reassurance, Deathbird wants Xavier to take a loyalty test, which would force him to renounce Earth and have all memories of his life on Earth erased. And that's taken things a little too far. Naturally, Xavier's having a hard time with this because he really does love Lilandra, but he also really wants to remember his BFF Magneto. By the way, is it my imagination or has the Xavier-Magneto dynamic been not so subtly gay-coded in this show? I'm not even mad about it really, I just think it's funny. Anyway, Deathbird set all this up to force Lilandra to relinquish the throne because that's the only way they can be together if Charles doesn't go through with this, and Deathbird ruling the Shi'ar would not be good for anybody, she'd just be another Daken, so they're in a real bind here. And they take the time to discuss all the angles of this, the limited options they have, they give it a lot of gravity, which is good, even though Xavier's love life is not something I really care about. I don't mind it, but it's not what I'm here for. So finally, Charles considers this carefully, and even though it pains him, he reluctantly decides to go through with this for Lilandra's sake. That's love for you, baby. So he agrees to renounce his ties to Earth, but when it comes to renouncing his X-Men, he hesitates. That completely sets Deathbird off. One thing leads to another, and a fight breaks out with all the Shi'ar soldiers picking sides, which seems really pointless because whichever side Gladiator is on is going to win, and he's with Lilandra. So beats me what Deathbird thought this was going to accomplish. But eventually, the fight escalates to the point where finally Xavier is like, oh, this noise, class is now in session, assholes. So he telepathically takes everyone to the psychic plane with him, putting them in a literal classroom where he makes a case for himself. Great idea, Chuck. Way to stay on brand. Weirdly enough, his case is that the Shi'ar are just a bunch of warmongering thugs who built their empire by conquering and assimilating other civilizations, and if the only way for you to be more is for someone else to be less, that might mean that you're the bad guys here.
Are we the baddies?
It's more nuanced than I'm making it sound, but the short version is he's trying to inspire them with some good old-fashioned idealism, espousing things he learned from the heroism of his X-Men. It's a really good speech, and they seem to be starting to listen to him, but then things get really dark really fast. They crank up the nightmare fuel, and in a very chilling sequence, everyone but Xavier turns into a skeleton. A giant spectral image of Gambit looms over them. It turns into a skeleton. It unleashes a blast just like the Uber Sentinel did, and this shocks Xavier back to reality, absolutely horrified, because he now has learned what just happened in Genosha. I'm not sure how, since that was on the other side of the galaxy. I guess he felt a great disturbance in the Force or something. Also, interesting that he saw Gambit instead of Magneto, who he has the much closer connection with, so it's likely a pretty safe bet that Magneto survived the attack somehow, as much as I wish he hadn't. We never did see a body, remember? To be continued on that, but now Charles knows that some really awful shit has gone down back home, and even though it could mean the end of him and Lilandra, the time has come for him to return to his X-Men. This was really good. Unlike the Storm story, it got just the right amount of time it needed. They built up the importance of it. Mileage may vary on how many shits you give about Xavier and Lilandra. I personally don't give that many, but the point is they drove it home that even though he loves her and would sacrifice almost anything to be with her, at the end of the day, his X-Men will always come first. They just wanted to add some pathos to him realizing that. Again, you might not have cared about this so much, but I thought it was some really good character work, and that ending was killer. Look, I don't dislike this episode. I don't think it's bad. It's definitely better than episode 4. The Xavier story made up for the weaker Storm plot. It's just one of those episodes that's about letting you catch your breath while it sets the table for later. The big takeaways here are Storm getting her powers back and Xavier realizing that he has to go home and get to work. And that's what the rest of the season is about. Episode 5 brought the X-Men to their lowest point, and the back half of the season is going to be about them pulling their shit back together and taking the bad guys down. And let's not forget what else happened here. I was very happy to see some Gambit cameos. The Storm story had one too. Homeboy may be dead right now, but he's still visible, and I appreciate that. And we know this show loves to foreshadow stuff, so if the spectral evil Gambit was hinting at something to come, there were definite teases of him being resurrected as Death. Because in the comics, Gambit was Apocalypse's horseman Death for a short time. I have mixed feelings about this, because that story in the comics is kind of bad, but at this point they'd have to take so many liberties with it that they'd probably make it better. Frankly, it's kind of a low bar to clear. So we'll see where that goes. Gambit returning as Death is a big possibility now. I'm still in the camp that Cable resets the timeline and changes something so Gambit lives, but that's not the only option. And if Gambit does become Death for a while, that might be more emotionally satisfying if the X-Men have to find a way to save him from that, but it wouldn't be much of a stretch for them to do both. Like maybe Cable saves Gambit, but then somebody else intervenes, because where Cable goes, Apocalypse can't be far behind. And looking at Gambit, a mutant who took down the Uber Sentinel all by himself, a mutant who defied death and came out the other side, that would get Apocalypse's attention. And there was a clip of him and Cable in the intro where we know they like to tease us with stuff, so Apocalypse is most likely gonna show up at some point here. But we're not done yet. There's a little more to this. In the final scene, we catch up with Bolivar Trask, who gets run down by Mr. Sinister. And this is a far cry from the man we saw in episode 1. Trask is mortified and racked with guilt now, even begging Sinister to kill him because he can't bear to be responsible for what happened in Genosha. Apparently, Trask gave Sinister his DNA to access Master Mold, and it was actually Sinister who was behind the attack. And I love this so much. What was my complaint about Trask in episode 1? He didn't seem like himself. He was totally out of character. All that guilt about the monster he created with Master Mold was just gone. But this accounts for that now. It wasn't really him. He didn't want to do it. It was Sinister pulling the strings the whole time. This eliminates a gigantic plot hole in the narrative, and it gets Sinister back in play, which I'm super excited for. And coincidentally, that's another way they could bring Gambit back. Sinister could revive him like he did with Morph back in the day. And that would be a great callback because Gambit does have a history with Sinister in the comics. A very dark and tragic history. So if they wanted to incorporate elements of that, color me intrigued. There's just one thing I'm wondering about. Something is fishy about this because it seems to be using elements of the Morlock Massacre story where Sinister had the Marauders slaughter the Morlocks who he viewed as genetic dead ends. But why would Sinister want to wipe out Genosha, which was full of S-tier Alpha and Omega mutants? That's a whole island full of prime genetic stock that Sinister would want access to, so him destroying Genosha doesn't add up. There's something big going on here that we're not seeing yet. I wonder if Sinister could be some elaborate red herring before they get to the real big bad, or maybe there's more than one villain at play here. I mean, we know the 3-part finale is adapting Operation Zero Tolerance, so you have to think that Bastion is going to be involved somehow, and Apocalypse is very likely on the way too, so could it be all 3 of them maybe? It wouldn't take much effort to make that work, and Apocalypse and Bastion, they would absolutely want to wipe out Genosha, so there's a lot of really cool possibilities here. I'm excited to see what happens, but I'm really most excited for the Gambit stuff. Yeah, I know I'm fixated, alright? I don't give a shit. He's my favorite character and I want him back. Shut up. They're definitely hinting at something to come with him. You know he's not gonna stay dead. Same thing with Magneto. And there's already 3 really solid possibilities for how they could bring him back, and any one of them would make sense. And frankly, the sooner they can get that ball rolling, the better. Because Gambit's been so buzzed about since episode 5. This is probably the hottest that character has been since the 90s. Obviously, animation takes a long time, so they're gonna be stuck with whatever the original plan was, but they've really captured lightning in a bottle here. They need to capitalize on it somehow. The question is, when does it happen? If he's gonna come back as Death or twist it into something evil like Morph was, that feels like something you'd want to save for a cliffhanger reveal to lead into season 2, but this show moves really fast, so who knows? They might want to wrap this up by the end of episode 10. Either way, Gambit's story is not done yet, and the folks over at Marvel can troll us about that all they want, but I'm not falling for it. This episode was uneven. The Storm plot felt like pieces of the better story we should have gotten, and that kind of sucks, but the Xavier story was better, even if it did take a while to get to the part we really cared about. I love the teases of Gambit and Sinister. They fixed the plot hole with Trask, so even though the Storm story ended up being a bit ill-conceived, I still feel good about this one. Things are really starting to come together. Stories are coalescing, intrigue is rising, the pacing is still hit and miss, but it is improving. Nightcrawler's got a title card in the intro now, so we're gonna get more of him. That's good. The show is on the right track. Now all they have to do is stay on it. Thanks so much for watching. While you're here, ding that bell icon and follow my social media so you can always be notified when I upload new stuff. The links are down there. And don't forget to do all the other YouTube things. Hit that thumbs up, share the video, subscribe if you haven't already, make sure you're still subscribed, and I'll be back with more real soon. See you next time.